Drawer hardware is expensive. I'm going to show you how I saved $1,300 by making super simple cabinets without any hardware, and they look good too. I'll also reveal the secret to hunting down the best plywood without getting ripped off. This episode of WhitWorks is sponsored by SimpliSafe. The game plan. Wait, wrong channel. This is the design my friend Steve and I came up with. Now the requirements for this build were simple. 1, I needed at least 10 feet of storage. B, I want the storage to look good. Roman numeral 3, I want the drawers to be standardized so they can move around as my needs change. They also need to be easy to build. And lastly, here's the big one, they need to be affordable. Now I priced out several drawer slide options, and the most expensive was $1,300 for 36 sets. And the least expensive was $900. So here's the challenge for this build. I'm going to try to build this 10-foot wall of cabinets for less than the price of drawer hardware alone. Now it will be tight, but I think I might be able to pull it off. Since my big table saw is still on the injured reserve list after taking an unplanned bath, I'm going to be making these cabinets using a track saw 95% of the time. Now this is good for you because it gives me the chance to share with you 3 brilliant tips and tricks that I've come across that will help improve any project that you do with plywood. This first one is from Jason Ben, so go unsubscribe from his channel if you haven't already. Before you make any cuts, you want to deal with the factory edge, which is most likely damaged. It's really easy. You just line up your track about 3 millimeters off the factory edge and you make your first cut. After that, all of your cuts will be referencing this clean edge. And I admit, this is the first time that I've actually done this in a project before because I'm usually in a rush to just get going, and I'm embarrassed that I haven't adopted this sooner. Doing this ensured that all of my cuts were perfect using this high quality plywood. Second tip is this, use parallel guides. They make things faster and easier. I would see people using these, and for the longest time, I didn't understand what the advantage was. And so if that's you, let me explain. It's like having a table saw fence in your hand for your track saw. With these flip stops, you can set your desired width, reference one edge of the piece, and without marking or measuring, you can make repeated cuts just like you would at the table saw. I was able to cut down a sheet of plywood in a matter of minutes accurately because of a well-planned cut list and these parallel guides. The third tip is closely related, and that's if you have parallel guides, you don't have to have a really long track that is the length of your material. You can get by with just a standard 55-inch track. You can shimmy your track down the other half of the length after your first cut, and since you're referencing the same edge, you get a perfect cut every time. Now, I've never seen anyone do this or talk about it, so this is me attempting to take credit for the idea, but we all know that someone else thought of it first. Now, while I was working, my wife came out and told me that it might rain and that it would probably be a good idea to bring the wood in my table saw inside. When I looked at the forecast, it said no rain. And so we got in a slight argument about who was right, and I won and left the plywood outside. 20 minutes later, just as I finished celebrating my victory, I noticed this garbage. 60% of the time, she's right every time. Speaking of losing battles, before I show you how to assemble the cabinet and drawers, we need to go back in time to when I tried to buy good plywood for this project. The price, oh my word, the best sheet of plywood I could find was $79, and it still had its voids and issues.
All right, that's not ideal. The problem is I need plywood today, tomorrow at the latest. I don't want to pay $80 for junk. I just want good quality plywood. So I'm gonna try that other store. Maybe we'll get lucky.
So I drove across the street to the blue store. Turns out the price of garbage is also $79 there.
So that was a waste of time. In my last city, I found a small company that deals directly to professional cabinet makers. Plywood I got there was usually half the price of what I could find at a big box store and 2 or 3 times the quality. I'm in the DFW area now. I'm gonna try to find one of those places. Don't think I'm gonna be able to find one right off the bat. So I'm just going to Google plywood company in Fort Worth, and maybe that'll be a good start.
I literally Googled plywood company in Fort Worth and found this company called, not kidding, Plywood Company of Fort Worth. I kind of thought it could be an internet scam until I showed up, and sure enough, That's the name of the company.
All right, I just peeked inside and it looks like a professional showroom. I'm a little nervous that they only sell to professionals and they wouldn't sell to a regular guy like me. But just in case that happens, I brought along a secret weapon that is foolproof, that when they see it, they will welcome me in and sell to anybody at bulk pricing. Let's try it out.
Now, I was kind of scared, but with this solid strategy, I walked into the showroom, met this guy standing guard, and after an awkward staring contest, I said the secret password, and this happened.
Come on in.
Now this place has it all. They even have plywood made from Mappa burl. I thought about making my cabinets from it until I saw that it was $1,500 a sheet. Now, since I don't have Jackery battery sponsor money, I decided to move on. And when I got past the showroom, I found a helicopter posing as a fan, the biggest and cleanest aisles I've ever seen in a lumberyard, walnut at every turn, here, and here, and I finally found some solid plywood options to test out. Now, the first sheet that I bought to test out was $40. I wanted to see if it would work. And I bought another higher grade for $80 just to see if there's a difference. I bought some of each to compare to see if I can get away with using a $40 option in the future. Don't you hate it when YouTubers are lazy and default to that tired and worn SpongeBob transition? Yeah, that's the worst.
The next day.
Now the coolest part of all this is since I bought more than $450 worth of plywood, MDF, and black laminate, they delivered my order to me the next day for free, even though I live 40 minutes away. And here's all the parts that you need to make one cabinet. You don't need to waste plywood building a top or a bottom. You just need 3-inch stretchers, and one of the stretchers on the bottom will be slightly bigger because of the toe kick. We'll talk more about the toe kick in a little bit. But right here, you can see this is really what makes up each cabinet. Now on the bottom, I'm gluing on a spacer just so that the bottom drawer doesn't ride on the very, very bottom. And sometimes that plywood wants to bend when you cut it free. So this is how you fix that. Now, a lot of people building this cabinet would probably cut dados in the sides of these cabinets using either a dado blade on the table saw or some type of router bit. I've done that before and I don't like doing it for a couple of reasons. First, it makes a lot of sawdust, it's loud, it makes a mess. Inevitably, I mess it up. But most importantly, it weakens the sides of the cabinet, and that's what happened at my last shop. Now, if you're a beginner or even an intermediate woodworker, building a cabinet seems like it's out of reach and it's very intimidating. But this design is so easy. You don't need a whole lot of special tools. The one trick is there is some intricate math involved if you want standardized drawers that can move around. The good news is we made all of these in a plan that you can download immediately. And if you want to build this or hack this and modify it for your needs, this is super easy. I can't imagine spending $120 per cabinet on draw hardware. Go check it out. Now that first cabinet you saw me building was the prototype just to work out all the math. And once I got that squared away, I was able to build all the other cabinets really quickly, and I was eager to line them up to get a glimpse in person on what my new cabinets would look like in space. Now here's how I made that jig. I ripped a piece of plywood that was the exact thickness of my spacing, and I just glued a reference piece 90 degrees. After that, I glued another piece of scrap on the top and bottom to reference the front edge of where the false fronts would be. I wasn't sure if this jig would be square and accurate, but I did all of the remaining 5 cabinets using this, and they were perfect every time. It's also really satisfying making a little jig like this on the fly, and it worked. And if you wanted to make cabinets like this, you could stack them and have a tall set of cabinets with all kinds of drawers. Now, when I first started building cabinets, one of the things that confused me for a long time was how to do the toe kicks. And a lot of times you'll see people just cut them out of the side of the cabinet. I don't like to do that. And I first got this idea from watching this no-name beginner YouTuber, Mark Spagnolia, I think is his name. And he showed how you just build a different base that's shallower. And so this is what I'm doing here, is I'm building my toe kick separately. A couple of reasons reasons why you want to do this. First, it's just a cleaner look and you don't have to take a jigsaw or a bandsaw to the sides of your cabinets. But most importantly, it's way easier to level this base and then set all of your cabinets on that than to cut out toe kicks on each one of your cabinets, and then you have to level all of your cabinets individually. Now, my garage floor slopes quite a bit, and for a good reason. This is actually what you want in case you have an unfortunate water leak. We're not going to talk about that. You want water to drain outside. So the way you go about this is with shims. At first, all I had was some wooden shims and I didn't have enough, so I was gonna have to go to the store and buy some more. And that's when my friend Jason Bent told me that I should probably get composite shims. I asked him why, and he said they're more consistent. And I never thought about the inconsistency of wood shims, but he was totally right. I may have overdone it on the shims. I call this chapter Shim City. For the shims that stuck out, I just used my oscillating tool to cut them. They were pretty easy. And like a kid on Christmas, I wanted to see what my cabinets look like, so I temporarily placed them all on there. And look at that gap. I mean, probably most garages are going to have a gap like this, but I will show you a way to fix this. It's really easy. I found this scrap piece of plywood that I brought from my last house that was living outside at one point and started to grow mold or mushrooms, you can see right there. So instead of throwing it away, I figured I could just scribe this by placing it flat on the floor, placing my track saw on that line, and then I just cut it. Easy. I clamped the other side in place, took the offcut, scribed it again, and with the magic of YouTube, and check this out. Now ideally, you'd probably want to use a 1/4-inch sheet of plywood or something for this, but this is all I had. So I used my 3M sander with extract sandpaper, and I quickly sanded off what I think was a mushroom fungus growing on this plywood. A little glue and some clamps, and maybe slightly 1 or 2 extra brad nails. Let me know if you go overkill on the brad nails as well. Pretty awesome if you ask me. You couldn't even tell if the floor was uneven. Now this end I will fix with a end panel. I'll show you that in a little bit. But man, Shim City never looked so good. And in case we ever sell this house, which at some point we probably will, I left a little note here in case someone ever tears this out. I want them to know who's responsible for this. Now's the time that I've been waiting for, is to finally install the cabinets so I can get to making stuff. Now that end does not look great. And before I fix that, we're gonna clamp all of the cabinets together and make sure they're level, which they are. Now I will screw them all together, and then after that's done, I will screw them into the studs going through the stretchers using some shims to make up the difference between the drywall. I don't know about you, but I need more clamps. All right, so if you have a keen eye, you probably noticed that there was some rough drywall repair behind where my upper cabinets are going to go. On a whim, I cut a small hole to see if there was any insulation in this part of the garage, and there is none. And so I wanted to take this time to put insulation in it so that in the future, I don't have to rip these cabinets out just to insulate this part of the garage. Now this is probably not how you want to do it, but my dad and I just cut out a section behind where the upper cabinets would go. We slid in some fiberglass bats and then we patched it up. You can't even tell I did anything, right? A random troll commented and said I should probably tape and bed the joints for maximum protection, but that sounds like a lot of work. So I put a poll on Instagram asking if I should duct tape it or tape and bed it, and wouldn't you know, the internet wants to see more duct tape content on YouTube. Now from an airflow insulation standpoint, I don't really know if this duct tape is going to functionally do anything for me, but the internet decided. So let me know what you think. And boy, if anyone buys this house and they take these cabinets off, they're in for an incredible surprise. Now before I made a single cut, I made sure that all my cuts would be behind where my upper cabinets are so that this nonsense would be covered. Now it was time to make the DIY laminate counter, which I've never done before. I noticed some dark clouds, so in order to avoid another I told you so moment, I went ahead and cut this MDF in half. This is a 10-foot long piece of MDF. It was really heavy. Using the track saw, I was able to just trim off the ends to exactly 10 feet. I may have forgot to turn on the vacuum. Using the parallel guides again, I was able to dial in the exact width that I want this counter to be, which is 24 inches. In referencing one of the edges, I was able to trim both sides of the other side, and then I flipped that around and trimmed the other side. That makes total sense. I've seen a lot of people on social media make their own counters using black Formica, and this was the most stressful part of the build because this 5x12 sheet of black laminate was $150. And using contact cement, you have one shot. Now, I was really worried about cutting myself with this, and I didn't have a scoring blade, so I figured I could probably use my track saw, and it worked out great. I even invented this new hop skip track saw cutting method. My strategy here was to laminate the ends on first and then the front edge, and then at the very end, once I was comfortable, I would put the top on. I stared at this piece of laminate for a couple of hours, thinking things through, watching YouTube videos on how to do it, and I had to call in backup. I mentioned to my dad that I was doing this. He asked if I wanted help. I said sure, and he drove over that night, and there's no way that I could have done this successfully without him. It's a pretty straightforward process. You put contact cement on the back of your laminate and then on your substrate. I needed to do 3 coats on each. You let them dry until they're pretty tacky. As soon as they touch, they're stuck. Now, if you're thinking 3 coats, really, look at how this MDF soaks up this contact cement. Now, in real time, I thought it was crazy, but looking back at it sped up, I am amazed. I left the sheets about a 1/4 inch proud all the way around so that I could come with my trim router, which is upside down, to show you which way you should actually do it, and cut it. Now, doing this long 10-foot piece by myself, I'm sure pros know a trick on how to do it, but there was no way that I was going to do this successfully the first time by myself, and having an extra set of hands totally helped. Also, I think I'm going bald. That's fun. Welcome to 40. Battery change. And if you're ever doing this, eye protection, ear protection, nose protection, this stuff is nasty. My dad brought a file with him that has a name that I'm not allowed to say on YouTube. Now, this is a cool trick that I've seen on social media and I've never tried. It's you take painter's tape and you make a V on top of your paint can or contact cement can, and then you pour it, which makes it way easier. But the coolest thing, and I'll show you at the end, is when you pull the tape off, your rim is perfectly clean, which means you can reseal this for later use. I just poured this straight on the MDF and tried to roll as fast as I can. Like, this is real time. I haven't sped this video up. Actually, I did speed it up, but we went really, really fast. We placed a bunch of these slats on top of the contact cement after it had dried, which would allow us to temporarily place in a line the laminate top. And then one by one from the middle, working outwards, we can pull the slats and make contact all the way down. Now, this is my first time doing this. And given that it was my first time, I think it turned out pretty well. But what the pros say is you start in the middle and then you work your way out to the other sides. And after all of that stress of literally thinking about this all day, hoping that I didn't mess it up because it would be a really expensive mistake, it worked out. Until I went to route the edges. And ladies and gentlemen, I have, I think, what is either a tip for you or an opportunity for you to tell me what I did wrong. This entire counter turned out flawless except for the edge. And I think what happened was that I was pushing the bearing too hard. But in this shot, it doesn't look like I'm pushing hard at all. But if I'll show you a close-up here in a moment of some markings that made it all the way around the edge where the router bit barely cut into the laminate when trimming. This took all evening to do because we took our time. I think we ended at about 10:30 at night. Clean lid, check that out. That tape trick is awesome. I found some 1/2 inch plywood scraps that I placed up against the end panel that needs to be covered. And this notch right here is for the baseboard. I measured roughly where I need to cut out, and I took some double-sided tape, made in the USA, and I made a temporary fence so that I could take my oscillating tool and cut this out because I hate jigsaws. Do you like tear out? How's that tear out? No one will see it. I used a file to clean up a couple of the edges so that I could sneak up on the fit. I then used the pencil just to scribe in place where everything went. It only took me about 5 to 10 minutes to cut this side panel so that it would fit perfectly. And of course, I had to put a special message written in glue on the side of this panel before clamping it and brad nailing it in. And when I put everything together, you don't see any of the shims, you don't see the bottom base. It matches perfectly with the counter. Now I had about 36 drawer bottoms to sand and prep, and this was a very satisfying point of the build where I tested the fit of all of the bottoms, which are also the runners because of how the drawer is designed. Now, one of the goals for this build was to build it without any hardware. And I did test out some handle options that would just involve cutting a hole, but I didn't like them. And I really wanted something physical to pull on. So I found several 3D printed design options that flexed a little bit too much. And I suspected that they wouldn't hold up to use. So I am cheating a little bit, and I found these metal drawer pulls, but they're about $1.50 each. They're really slick, solid, and cheap. So this is the part where I put on some headphones and I just went through a pocket hole craze of making all of the drawer parts. I'm sorry, draw. It's pronounced draw. Now, the easiest way that I found to assemble pocket hole screws is to just put them in parallel clamps like you would if you were gluing things up. And that way you can sneak up on the fit and then just drive the screws home. I've tried tons of other clamps and they seem to just never get it quite right. Let me know if you have found a better way to assemble lots of pocket screw joints in a different way. But for me right now, this is the best thing that I've come up with. This is the part of the build where a lot of the payoff is starting to happen because I'm seeing my brainchild in real time, in reality, in the physical world, and things are all working. Now, when it came time to add the bottoms, I was going to make a jig, but I thought that this would be the easiest, and I just measured center on one of the drawers, and since all of these, draws are exactly the same, this works on all 36 draws. There we go. With one of the draws marked as center, I just transferred all of the measurements so that I could line up the center line that I did in a similar fashion on all of the bottoms 36 times. Rinse and repeat. I'm not going to bore you with it. Now, the first couple I did, I was really tentative and I made sure I lined it up perfectly and very gently put 2 clamps on and flipped it over. And as I got comfortable, you'll see how I just adjusted. Now, I'm not using glue on purpose in case I ever need to repair these. Basically, what I did was I flipped these over so that they're upside down. I put 1 clamp in place. I lined up that first line. I tacked in one side. I flipped it around, squared it up, tacked that side, and then I ran nails all the way through on the sides. Now, one trick that really helped is I took a combination square and I measured the distance that the draw bottom overhangs, and I was able to transfer that onto the bottom of the draw. And that gave me a visual reference on where to nail the bottom on. And here you can see how this really works. Now, after 35 draws assembled, I didn't miss a nail once, and this was the last draw. And as you can see, when I turn this over, I missed a nail on the very last one. I'm kidding, it was perfect. I can't believe it. I didn't shank a nail one time. Has that ever happened to you? I spent a lot of time thinking about how to handle the handles. And while you could cut out a shape which would look amazing, you would have to cut out that shape twice because this is a false front. So with these metal handles, the only downside is that there needs to be a slight recess cut out on the back of the false front so that the false front will sit flat against the draw front. I thought this was going to be a pain, but actually it was really easy setting up a router table that is just a really simple DIY router table that I made. Using some stop blocks, setting the depth of cut using the hardware itself, I was able to cut out this mortise similar to like you'd see on a door. Now, normally my perfectionism would get to me and would force me to cut these short and then finish it up with a chisel so that all of the corners are square. But this is weak 3 of building these, because it takes a project about 10 times longer when you're videoing for YouTube, I realized no one is going to see the back of these false fronts, and so I just routed them a little bit deeper so that I really wouldn't have to take a chisel to square them up. I am really pleased and impressed with how slick these $1.50 metal drawer pulls look. I know these are shop cabinets and they're kind of supposed to be a little sloppy, but I can't stop looking at them. I mean, I'm really happy with myself and proud of the work that I did. 4 years ago, I bought the plans for these upper cabinets from Fix This Build That. I love them so much, I'm building them for a second time for this new setup. They are the easiest upper cabinets to build. I built 4 units, 10 feet worth, in half a day for under $200. My favorite part about them is that the inside shelf is half the depth, which allows for you to utilize the back of the doors for storage. And if you use an adjustable shelf pin jig, you can customize the placement of every horizontal shelf you put in the cabinet. I'll link to Brad's video and plans in the good old D-Box. And here's a tip for installing cabinets by yourself. If you screw onto the wall a horizontal board like a straight 2x4, if you can find one, then you can transfer the locations of the studs to the back of the cabinets, pre-drill for your screws, and with one hand hold the cabinet in place while you screw into the studs. Now, instead of using a temporary ledge like I just explained, I went ahead and installed my plywood backsplash first so that I could use that to set the cabinets on. In my next video, I'll show a bunch of cool shop tool holders that I will screw onto this plywood backer to hold my most used tools. Pegboard is for children. Subscribe if you want to see that. Now, for the 6 people still watching, I have a secret that I want to let you in on that you're going to love. Before I spill the beans on that, let's see if I failed or succeeded in building these cabinets for under $900, the amount I would have spent on the cheapest drawer slides alone. The cool thing about this design is that a single lower cabinet unit with 6 drawers takes 1 sheet of 3/4 and 1 sheet of 1/2 inch plywood. I built 6 of them, so I needed 6 sheets of each size of plywood. Most of the plywood that I bought was the higher grade domestic 3/4 inch material for $80 each. Now, while it was basically $1 more than what I found at the big box stores, the quality of this was so much greater. So even though I spent the same amount, I got significantly better material. However, I bought some of the cheaper import plywood for $40 to use on the upper cabinets, and if I had to do this over again, I would have bought that for everything because it was just as good as the expensive kind, just with a lower grade veneer, and I don't really care about that. If you include the cost of the MDF, black laminate, drawer pulls, screws, glue, contact cement, J-roller, and this Craig plywood carrier that saved my back, I spent a total of $1,222.82 on the lower cabinets alone. Now, I guess I failed the $900 test, but it is cheaper than if I went the Bloom route. Now, if I had used the cheaper import plywood instead of the $80 domestic plywood, that total would have come to $981, and I would have been a lot closer to my goal. Now, this was outside of the scope of this video, but as I was building it, I decided to build these upper cabinets, throw them in there at the tail end, and I spent a total of $221 on those cabinets, which included drawer pulls and these LED lights. So my total cost for this entire 10-foot wall of upper, lower cabinets with a counter and LED lights is $1,444.43. Now, while I technically broke the budget and didn't meet my goal, it is cheaper than if I were to have built these cabinets and bought all of those drawer slides. All right, so here's the payoff for those of you who are still watching. Did you really think that I was going to put duct tape on the drywall? Heck no. When you weren't watching, I actually tape embedded the drywall seams because I'm not an animal. Now, the cool thing about this is if you look in the comments below, all the people who didn't watch this end and who are slightly triggered by me using duct tape, they're probably going to comment about it. So if you want a good laugh, you can go to the comment section and look for all those people who are roasting me for using duct tape or praising me for using duct tape. And all those people commenting that way, you and I will both know that they didn't watch to the end. And if you're watching to the end and you see those comments, would you leave a comment and somewhere in the comment use the snorkel emoji? That way I and everyone else will know that you made it to the deep end. If you want to build cabinets like these and support the channel, check the link below.
If you like the vibe, join my daddy's tribe on Patreon. Wahoo!